Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders wants Exxon Mobil investigated by the Department of Justice. Now, why? Well, in a letter to Attorney General Loretta Lynch sent earlier this week, Sanders charged the oil giant of engaging in a cover-up to intentionally mislead the public about climate change. Quote, "It appears that Exxon knew its product was causing harm to the public and spent millions of dollars to obfuscate the facts in the public discourse. The information that has come to light about Exxon's past activities raises potentially serious concerns that it should be investigated." Now, he mentions information. What information? Well, there was a recent investigation by Inside Climate News that found that Exxon Mobil had conducted research as far back as 1977 affirming that climate change was caused by carbon emissions from burning fossil fuels. Now, in 1977, James F. Black, who was an Exxon employee, he was an expert in the field in research and development for Exxon, gave a speech to the company's management committee, saying, partly, "In the first place, there is general scientific agreement that the most likely manner in which mankind is influencing the global climate is through carbon dioxide release from the burning of fossil fuels." Now, that was originally taken pretty well by the committee, and they decided that they were going to do some more research into this, into carbon dioxide from fossil fuels and its impact into the earth. Now, according to Inside Climate News, some of that research included a program that included both empirical CO2 sampling and rigorous climate models. They even rigged up a boat, a tanker, to take measurements. Now, Inside Climate News reporters interviewed former Exxon employees, scientists, and federal officials and consulted hundreds of pages of internal Exxon documents, many of them written between 1977 and 1986, during the height of Exxon's climate research program. So this isn't just information from, the supposed crazy scientists on the global conspiracy of climate change. This comes from Exxon Mobil itself. I'm pretty sure that Exxon Mobil wouldn't conduct research on the impacts of climate change if it didn't exist, if it wasn't a consideration. And trust me, it was. Actually, don't trust me. Trust their own documents, as I'm going to go through them. Now, what they found was detailed in a 1982 corporate primer on carbon dioxide and climate change. And this was prepared by its Environmental Affairs Office. They actually had one. And this was marked not to be distributed externally. Now, this contained information that has been given wide circulation to Exxon management. In it, the company recognized that despite the many lingering unknowns, the heading off of global warming would require major reductions in fossil fuel combustion. And they said that unless that happened, there are some potentially catastrophic events that must be considered. Once the effects are measurable, they might not be reversible. Right there, you have Exxon Mobil saying, yes, we don't know everything about this, but our data suggests that climate change, kind of a bad thing, and we need to do something about it before it's too late. If you can measure the effects, then it's already too late. So they knew. And they spent millions of dollars on research, and at one point, they actually led the corporate world on the issue of climate change, of research. And it even led them into making some business decisions based on environmental impacts. From the investigation, they found, quote, throughout the 1980s, the company is worried about developing an enormous gas field off the coast of Indonesia. Why? Because of the vast amount of CO2 the reservoir would release. So they actually took this and said, well, we could develop that field, but if we do so, massive CO2 release, and we would be speeding up climate change, global warming. Well, they were worried about that. They were also worried that reports about synthetic oil made from coal tar sands and oil shales could also significantly boost emissions in CO2. Now, the company was heavily invested in synfuels to meet growing energy demand in the future. Now, at that time, they actually thought that the world was running out of oil. Now, so they wanted to bank for their future, understandably. But then they looked at the synth fuels and were like, ooh, that's a lot of CO2. Maybe we shouldn't go in that route. This sounds a lot different than the Exxon Mobil of today. That seems like it wants to make profit no matter the environmental impacts. Well, you're right. Something changed. In the mid-1980s, after an unexpected oil glut caused prices to collapse, Exxon cut its staff deeply to save money. Who did they cut most? Most of the people working on climate. Of course. Now, not just that. What else changed? Well, political action based part on Exxon's research into the role of CO2 was also taken more seriously in Congress. So, in the end, they made a business decision. They were going to change their minds, and instead of admitting that their business model was bad for the climate, they were going to turn around and deny that it even existed. Climate change? Nope, not here. Not happening. It's natural processes. Human beings couldn't possibly affect the climate by burning fossil fuels, so burn away and make us lots of money. That's what happened. And in so doing, they started giving millions of dollars to politicians and organizations that promote climate denial. And of course, they spent millions more buying our politicians to prevent regulations to limit carbon emissions. Remember, in the Republican side, cap and trade used to be a popular idea. They came up with the idea. Now that's considered communism. I'm serious. They hate the idea now. They have been so thoroughly bought by the oil industry, by places like Exxon Mobil, that they can get their lackeys to go outside and grab a snowball to try and prove a ridiculous point. It's cold outside. What climate change? That's what millions of dollars gets you. Dunces like, Jim Inhofe. Jim Inhofe. So, not only that, but ExxonMobil also helped found and lead the Global Climate Coalition. Oh, wow, the Global Climate Coalition. Boy, that sounds like really Orwellian, because it fucking is. It's an alliance of some of the world's largest companies that actually, their mission was to halt government efforts to curb fossil fuel emissions. Exxon used the American Petroleum Institute, a right-wing think tank, campaign contributions, and its own lobbying firm to push a narrative that climate science, well, we just don't have the science. We still don't know enough, so let's not be hasty. Let's not rush to put climate regulations into place on greenhouse gases. No, we can't do that. We don't know everything yet. Really, just because we supposedly don't know everything, doesn't mean that we can't use what we do know to make sound decisions. And what we do know is that 97% of climate scientists say that climate change is happening and it's man-made. That human beings are contributing greatly to the rate of which the climate is changing. Now, climate has always changed, but it's the rate that matters. And since the Industrial Revolution, human beings have made that rate climb, increase, much more than it would naturally. And that is the problem here. And so, there you go. And here's where we're at. ExxonMobil, who was once a company that actually cared about research and science, now sits and fights an effort to do anything about it. Why? Well, it's because of money, human greed. And because of money in politics, unfortunately, they've gained an outside influence in Washington. It's sort of like the tobacco industry that actually hid the impacts of smoking from the public in order to make an extra dollar. Well, it didn't turn out good for the tobacco industry, so hopefully Bernie Sanders makes sure that it turns out bad for the fossil fuel industry. Now, in an interview with Think Progress earlier this week, the attorney who actually prosecuted the case against the tobacco industry said an investigation into Exxon Mobil by the Department of Justice is, quote, plausible and should be considered. Hell yeah. Hell yeah, it should be considered. Those assholes knew. They knew. And they did nothing. They did the opposite. They made it worse by trying to muddle the science and to finance an industry of denial just so they can pad their bottom lines and make sure that they have enough money, to make sure that they continue to be one of the richest corporations on Earth by destroying the planet. They should be investigated. And I hope they are. And I hope that Bernie Sanders, instead of the world feeling the burn, we want to make sure Exxon Mobil feels the burn.